Okay, Stearman people, here we go. Stearman Flying 2020, the virtual version. This will be the Bob Swint virtual seminar. I really enjoy giving these, and as we talk about a lot of subjects, we had talked about doing the tail wheel this year, and we're going to, but as you can see, I just got done changing my oil, and I actually discovered a little bit of a leaky valve on number 3. And so the first 2 weeks of my vacation, and Stephanie's probably mad at me because I don't have this video in yet, those 2 cylinders had to come off, and I just wasn't going to settle for anything less than having the valves reground, so I did. So we're going to start with things that we learn about the Stearman, and what I learned on this particular job was if you get far enough into your engine to where you mess with the cylinders, you have to stay very close track of things. These cylinders were new in crates, so when I took them apart to clean them, the valves were there, and I would keep each part in a baggie, I mean right down to the nuts and bolts, because I was smart enough to know that I wasn't smart enough to know everything there is to know, okay? On the valves, the intake and the exhaust. I'm sorry that I've already got the covers on here, okay? And keep in mind, I'm doing this video virtually by myself. So, not virtually, I'm doing it virtually and virtually by myself. This obviously is your exhaust port right here, okay? So underneath here is the valves with the springs and the rocker arms. The tops, the valves are different size. The exhaust is bigger, the stem is bigger than the intake. And the springs are the same, the bottom cap is the same, but the top cap is different and the keepers are different. The keepers are obviously bigger on the smaller stem, smaller on the bigger stem, okay? But the cap that goes over there is different. I discovered that. Luckily, I discovered that, and I consulted Ty, as everyone knows. And so anyway, that was something I learned for that. That's my engine anyway. So then that led me into tightening things back here, just going on. My airplane's got 100 hours on it now. So I tightened all of these clamps and safety wired them. This is the proper configuration for the rods for your throttle and your mixture, okay? I'm sure you can pause the video if you need to for that. There's 3 different oil tanks for the Stearman, and I think one was specific to a Jacobs. This oil cap here, I know is correct for this stem, but there's other oil caps that have the thing underneath here, right under there, that go down into it. Those will not work on this stem. Now you can change the stem out. This is just screwed into there, so you can do that. This is pretty much the exact stock configuration the Stearman would have been, except that is the Inertia Starter. It's not a tank starter, it's an Inertia Starter. And Mike Porter's putting one on him, as a matter of fact, I'm sending him a little solenoid that goes on here, but for now I couldn't figure out how to do that, so I just use a string from my cockpit. I used a string, not a cable, because in the event that anything would happen, the string is much easier to break, okay? That's about the only thing that's not. This is a QEC, so what you see is exactly how they looked. I didn't paint anything. This is exactly how the QEC I bought from Gill. I never even painted the step up there. It still has the black. And these little red things, those are right where they were on the QEC. And the yellows here are right. I think I added that one. But other than that, all the yellow things are there. Pay no attention to the duct tape. So any other little tricks back here I wanted to, the tack drives are usually what leak. So that's that. Oh, I don't know if you can see it, but that is the proper way to hook up I believe it's the A3 switch, or A3 I think, yeah. So anyway, my tank was for a Navy airplane. I even had that taken off and put the right PT-17 deal on there. So we're gonna start moving back. I don't know how simple or hard I need to get. Oh, this is another thing. I've seen airplanes that aren't like this. This stud this is how it's properly done here, okay? The stud is screwed into the fuselage, okay? And you take that in. I don't recall the torque, and I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to say it if I know it's wrong. Then you put the nut on, then you put the cotter pin in, and then you safety wire it to here so that the stud can't work its way out, okay? So let's see, was there anything else I learned during this? Yeah, no, and we're going to talk about the tail wheel. So working our way back, these are the Gid Air master cylinders. Mine were leaking, cost me some brake pads and some other things, but I ordered from McPherson and Carr, I believe it is, the proper O-rings that go down here. Now you can't just use that on a stock one. These are Gid Airs. And Gid Air was Gid Townsend, a guy that all of us old timers knew. And this will work, I don't know if Pete still has them or not. I know that, the place in Minneapolis, Arrow, everybody knows, the place in Minneapolis, super good people. They can rebuild these. But anyway, I just took mine apart. There's a little snap ring down here. And in this here, that's where Gid modified it. And there's a plunger in there with 2 O-rings on it. Between Ty and I, we researched and got the proper O-rings from McPherson, and I didn't know it, but I bought a bag of 100 of them. So if anybody's running these Gid Air cylinders and needs some O-rings, don't buy them, I got them. That's the stock D3 fuel valve and how it's supposed to be in there. There's controversy as whether they were painted red or not. There's no controversy as to what mine's painted because it's red. So one thing I've got to do today, this is a standard battery tray. I don't know if I can't really get in there to see that. But anyway, these are something I made. These hold downs are something that I made when I put them in there. I can't get it to not, hang on, let me see if this is a little difficult, but you're just gonna have to put up with it, okay? Those hold downs are not right. They obviously accomplish the same thing, but I try very hard to do my airplane with strictly parts. Well, Dave Groh is a wonderful supplier of great stuff, and he sells these battery hold down kits. Well, I bought them from him a couple years ago and lost them. I just found them, so that's next on the installation, okay? So that's just kind of some extra stuff. And yes, my little pins right here are original, right there. I know everybody says, well, they were just a screw that was taken off and milled off the top. Well, sorry, I did mine. I took them off of old wings that I found. Okay, so let's get to the tail wheel. So this cable right here that goes around here, okay, that cable, all of this has to work together. And that cable, I don't know if you can see it, it ties on right there, okay? It goes around the airplane, around those pulleys, and it ties back on right there, okay? So that cable tension is set up right there. So that cable tension does nothing but set itself, okay? It doesn't set itself, you have to set it. But it does not pull against the rudders. Everybody thinks that's a closed loop and it pulls against the rudders. It does not. This cable right here just goes between the two, and it actually holds the rudder pedals and everything in place. This cable right here, okay? So I'll just scan back here a little bit in case anybody wants to look at something that isn't whatever, okay? This right here is what we call a battery charger. And I'm sure you all know that my sheet metal came from just thousands of miles. One thing that nobody seems to catch at any fly-in, all the experts at the fly-ins, is the shock absorber tag on mine. Pay special attention to that. See, it says Boeing Airplane Company. I don't know the times on this. I don't know the dates on it. I'm sure Larry would. Larry is probably the best guy, nicest guy, and his wife, and probably the sharpest Stearman guy we have. Very humble. I didn't even paint that. That's what they looked like. I didn't paint it. I didn't paint anything. So what you see right here is exactly what the QEC looked like. Obviously, I put new hoses on, but that's what it looks like. Okay, so moving around, as I said on the other side, where it says Boeing, this door says Stearman Aircraft. And these doors, you know, like I said, everybody knows I hunted down, a lot of this stuff was painted and I had to strip it because I just wanted the bare metal look, okay? And I don't know when it said Stearman versus Boeing, I don't know. But I have one of each, and now they will notice that at Oshkosh or Galesburg. If you have these Gidairs, I have 4 of them, and right here, I'm pretty sure this is where I took the safety wire off, and that's so that you want to keep the parking brake thing that energizes the system back, okay? So here's the other cable I told you about, right here. And that heads back to where we're going next, okay? Well, I'll do a little scan here in case anybody wants to see some of this. Those are all the original blocks. Matter of fact, this one right here has a 75 number on it, if you look, which is great. I've got all my parking brake stuff in. I just haven't hooked it up yet. See it coiled right here? I'm probably gonna do that sometime. So anyway, I just concreted my hangar floor too. That's a little side note. So my airplane won't sweat. We concreted all of this. There's my tow bar, which if anybody's interested, it just works beautifully. And some friends of mine made that for me for $100. I am going to, right down here, put wheels on each side because it spreads if not used properly. Well, used properly. Okay, so anyway, we're coming to the back of the plane. Actually, we're gonna work our way back. We're not gonna come to the back yet. We're gonna come to the middle of the plane, okay? I know, the star is supposed to be centered over this, okay? And I know that because when I stripped that piece, it's original, you can see the 75 right there, punched through from the other side. When I stripped the paint off of this, about 10 layers of paint, you could see where the star was. I'm sure Mike's will be where it's supposed to, but mine, everybody thinks these planes were so symmetrical in paint jobs. I've never seen two that are the same, to be honest with you. Mine, the picture that I used to do this airplane, it was on Thunderbird Field. This airplane is a 1943, and it's, I believe, May, June, or July, which is when that star and bar changed. I told him in Oshkosh it was a 42, and I screwed up, and the guy threw me out of Oshkosh and had me arrested. Okay, so you know what? I don't remember where I got these stickers. I think Joe Ferrero from Indianapolis, one of my good buddies, turned me on to where I got those, and I really like them. I don't know if you can see in there. It has like the rigging information and certain things. Really cool. So anyway, this is the regular baggage compartment, the cloth one. I think the porters make a really beautiful square one that's just so much nicer. Okay, so here we are in the middle of the plane. I don't know what that is. It looks like a bug. Let's take a look. Yes, he's not on the manifest, but he's here. So anyway, this is what we're looking for here. Now, the cable that I told you, that is not it connected right there on the top, okay? The cable that I told you, you know, I don't even need my flashlight. So hang on, I want to save my battery. Okay, there's a cable from there to the back of the rudder rail, and it's duplicated on the other side, okay? Now, that cable hooks to the top there. Let me zoom in a little. That cable hooks to the top. That's your rudder cable, okay? It hooks to the top, and it follows that back to the rudder horn, okay? If you undo the rudder, those cables are gonna go slack, okay? So it's important that you set them cables properly. Right there, and Dave Grow at yesteryear, I believe, is making this this part, that whole arm, which is aluminum. And if you don't have the cables adjusted properly, okay, I'm gonna zoom back. So here's what we got. The top one is the rudder. It comes from the rudder pedals, we'll just say, back to the rudder horn, and that you need to have adjusted properly. You want to adjust that first and center your rudder, okay? There's turnbuckles all along the way to help you do that. Once you get that adjusted, this is what turns your tail wheel, okay? That's a spring. If you have the rudder too tight, well, I think more if you have your brake cables too tight, you put extra pressure between the top and the center, not the bottom, the top and the center. As you can see, what I'm talking about, the bottom one, is for your tail wheel when you move the rudders. I wished someone was here so they could sit in here and move the rudder. But if you have this too tight, it will fatigue and crack those right in the middle. And I can't, let me see if with my camera I can get to where they crack. They crack right there, right behind that hole. I had one that was cracked in all my parts and stuff. This is, I made them myself, but I don't know if they were a part number, but I remember reading a story about a guy that did a spin one time, and that thing flopped around and hooked on the bird cage, and he couldn't give it opposite rudder to exit the spin, and he finally desperately just slammed the rudder, and of course it pulled the aluminum off the bird cage, which is much weaker. So those are there to keep that from grabbing on anything. So those head back to the rudder, which is where we're going to go now, okay? Anything else to look at in here? Not really. Okay. If you have a bag door, if you have an original lock, you got to have this piece right here. You can't just screw it to the bird cage. That brings it out enough that it works good, okay? This is the door to look in the side. Everybody knows that. Okay, now we're coming to the back of the plane, and let me get my light out. I think we're going to need it here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is the tail wheel, and I'm going to do some more work at home on my bench, but I don't want Stephanie to lose faith in me. Okay, the first thing is, these are the standoffs for the tail wheel. This is an indexed clamp. In other words, it has a hole in it and it is screwed to the fuselage. Don't think that they're all indexed the same, because they're not. I had to re-index mine to get the proper angle on it, okay? I'm trying not to, maybe that's a good way of lighting it there. And it is a much, much heavier clamp, much better clamp. The early ones that were not like this, the heavy-duty ones, had a tendency to break. Both of mine in the projects were broke, okay? So there's the cable, the brake cable. I'm sorry, the steering cable that comes back and it goes through here. Okay, from here back is a enclosed, it encloses that cable, okay? So we're gonna walk around here and we'll get a look from here. And as you can see, that's where the rudder cables go out, okay? And there's your brake cables right there. Gosh darn it, I keep saying brakes, I mean steering. There's your steering cables, okay? Now we're gonna go down and get on our knees. Thank you, Jim Ratliff, for sending me those. I know that it's not supposed to have the black trim piece around it, but you know what, Stearman, people live with it. Okay, so I'm a year older, 63 as a couple days ago, so this is becoming increasingly tough. All right, let's start at the bottom. Now let's stick with the cables. Okay, so my tail wheel is sitting a little high right now. Why? Because I like it a little high, because when I'm backing it in, it releases easier. We'll talk about that with the strut in a minute, okay? Okay, so that is welded to the trunnion. There's the cable right there, and it comes to the trunnion. That's the trunnion, and it's welded right there. I've seen those welded a lot, re-welded, and the reason they are is because people don't spend the time and properly adjust their cables and make this mechanism release, which is going to be what I'm going to talk about in my house when I can be home looking at that, okay? So again, there's your rudder cables from the top piece. Here's your steering cables. There, I said it without saying brakes. Okay, so that's a standard spring. Twice, I've seen where guys, I don't know, couldn't find the spring or whatever, but they use a valve spring. I don't know if the valve spring works. I don't want to be the guy that finds that out. But I know you start breaking stuff if you don't adjust this stuff properly. Okay, again, my tail wheel's sitting a little high right now, but there's my tail wheel. This was the only thing I didn't restore. That was on the, I hunt arrowheads too, and sometimes when we find an arrowhead and it's broke, we'll say, is that a prehistoric break or is that broke by a farm implement? That's how I categorize this tail wheel hubcap. I don't think somebody restored, I think that's from the military, and I really think that's cool, so I just left it alone. Okay, key word, right there. Key word. I've talked to people that have tried to use the rayon, R-A-Y-O-N tires, which are basically cotton, and they blow up. Don't use rayon tires, and all the originals were rayons. This, I believe, is a Brazilian tire, and there's the size of a stock tail wheel. This is all stock, okay? And I believe this one was a Brazilian, but it was new. And Spruce sells a tube for this that works beautifully. You don't have to drill a hole in here. You don't have to bend it with a 10-ton press, okay? So that's a stock tail wheel. And it's obviously backwards right now. I don't know how obvious I need to be. But it is released right now. I don't think I can move it. But it is released, meaning that the tail wheel spline, which we're going to get into in part 2 of this, okay? When this moves the brakes, this thing twists, and you can see right here, right there, when this comes around, there's a cam underneath there. And when this comes around and goes forward or goes either way, okay? It rides up on that cam and it releases the tail wheel. And right now the tail wheel is sitting up above the splines so that it can free swivel. And that's what happens when you turn the tail wheel. And again, we'll get into that when we have this stuff exposed. This is the stock air oil strut, okay? Key, the way you set these, very simply, it's in the book, but very simply, you deflate this, you deflate it right here. And you take this fixture out. You take that nut out, okay? And all that is the nut seals in with a copper washer, and then this is your, where you put the air in, okay? So you take this out. It's all the way deflated, okay? You take it out, and you pour fluid in here, okay? Till it gets to the top, the hole right here, till you see it hit the top. Key point, you need to lift the airplane up and extend the strut. And you will hear it go as you're basically bleeding it. And you need to do that 3 times, okay? So let's go over it a little faster. You take this out, you deflate the strut first. Just press it like a little air thing. Okay, just press that little thing in there, let the air out, it will collapse. Do not have your head where mine is right now, or the stabilizer is gonna make you about a foot shorter, and I'm short enough. So take that out, lay down, let the air out, take this out, put your 5606 hydraulic fluid in there, okay? All the way up to the top. And then you have to have friends lift the airplane up, or you can jack it up and down slowly, however you want to do it. Extend the strut completely, okay? Put it back down, and you'll have to add more fluid because it's bleeding itself. It does have a metering rod down in here, okay? So you got to do that like 3 times. You're basically bleeding it. Once again, pull it out, put fluid in it, fully extend it, fully deplete it, put some more fluid in, and do that about 3 times. You'll know because it won't take down any more fluid, okay? Well, I think that's about it until I can be home tomorrow and or maybe even tonight and get some of the parts out of the basement and show you how this mechanism works and a few key things about that. While I'm thinking about it, when I did my airplane, I don't know if we can see it. When I did my airplane, I put one of these on right here, and I'm going to show you with some other parts. When I put it on, it would not go all the way around. It would not turn all the way around. It would swivel halfway and jam up against this piece, okay? And I had, because everywhere I went, I bought whatever parts I could buy. And I had about 5 of these right here. And I went to my basement and I looked them over and I measured and I thought, what could possibly be wrong? And went on and on and on. Well, there's a casting ridge right here. And right there, I have ground that off. Why? Because I went down in my basement and 5 of these had been ground in order for that to go all the way around. I don't know who ground them. I don't quite know why. It could have something to do with the, there's a cone bearing and there's a brass bearing, which we'll talk about later. But these were ground off, and I am convinced that they were probably ground off either by the military because this casting was just too high and they started to discover that. I'll guarantee you that in a book somewhere in the military it says, hey, when we're rebuilding these, let's grind that off, or that particular casting that came from Bendix Wheel or whoever might have made these castings, the different contractors, the casting was a little too high here. Interesting, but that's the kind of stuff we learn and we keep track of. Now the camera's gonna go everywhere while the old man gets up. So anyway, I guess that's about it until I can, I'll show you my cockpits too in case. Here's the original fire extinguisher thing, door. And that's I don't know that that's an original fire extinguisher because it says Army Air Forces, not Army Air Corps. Don't know, I'm not quite, I'm pretty anal, but I'm not quite that anal. Mine's a 43 PT-17. Probably would not have had the data case right there. The N2S5 PT-13Ds did. I really like that there because it's very handy for things. Otherwise, this is exactly as the PT-17 would look. And there's the crank right there. That's where it was. Those are checklists that my friend Rick Ropke got for me. Those are the original compass cards with I copied what was on there. And on the Army airplanes, they had an extra tag there that had your Air Corps number and whatnot. Parking brake, there's where the tack is. The instrumentation is exactly like what's in the book. I don't know if B-16s were in both cockpits. I think on the PT-17s they were. That's all stock and original, all the placards and stuff. Mine probably would not have had wooden floorboards. It would have had the corrugated floorboards, but ironically, my original fuselage had some drama to it, and it sure looked like it had wood floorboards in it. But interesting, in talking to Larry at the fly-in once, as you can see my crash pads, and at the fly-in last year, Larry said, hey, Bob, can I critique your airplane? I said, of course. I'd like to sit down and talk to Larry for like a year. And anyway, he said that the crash pads were on the original airplanes, okay? When they went in for rebuild and whatnot, they put, I don't think we can see it, it's underneath the seat, and it's a recoil for your shoulder harnesses. Those were not on the early ones, so they put the crash pads in there. When they brought the airplanes in and did some modifications to them, which who knows, maybe they would have put wood floorboards who knows. But anyway, when they melted them down, I was thinking about the floorboards, maybe they melted them down for extra metal later in the war. And Larry's going, So anyway, but what Larry said, if I remember him correct, or recall correctly, was that when they took them in and they modified these shoulder harnesses, underneath the seat with a recoil to keep the cadets from hitting the crash pads. They took the crash pads out because they didn't need them. So I thought that was very interesting. This piece right here that everybody says, oh, that was added later and whatever, you know, the reinforcement right there. That might be, but mine had a 75 number on it, so whatever. This was all stuff I found at Bob Hood's. That's original combing. And I got quite a bit of that, so if anybody's interested in that. And this is how these were. Nobody believes this. Well, let's see. That's in the sunlight. Maybe some of you believe it because I've given about 20 of these away at the fly-in. This piece right here, it's a rubber piece. It goes under the windshield and it comes back and goes over the combing here. And those are original. I bought those at Bob Hood's sale with Mike Templeton, which everybody's getting to know. He's a great guy. And so let's see. I think that's about it. I can't think of anything that I've learned recently that we need to talk about or anything. So I hope that we'll see. Well, I'm not done. This is just phase one of, this is just step one of my virtual seminar, okay? So I'll be back. I'm gonna send this to Stephanie right now so she doesn't put me on a hit list. I've heard those hit lists are bad. So we'll talk again either tonight. Actually, the way you guys are gonna see this is in step one and step two. So this concludes step one. I hope that I was informative to you. And I don't know how this is being done in case you would have any questions for me. I don't know how we would field those, but if there is a avenue and a way of doing that, I love talking Stearmans and I love passing along information I think we all need to share, okay? So we'll see you online and we'll see you in 2021. This concludes step one. Okay, Stearman people, Bob Swint here again to continue my seminar via the virtual world. These are the components of the tail wheel and the steering. I showed you the wheel and tire and all that yesterday on part one, and the trunnion as you saw it in the airplane. Here it is. I have to do this by myself because I couldn't get anybody to come and video me today. And I don't like setting it up and wondering if I'm in the right spot, and so we're going to do it this way. So anyway, there's the, remember we talked yesterday about the welds here. You can see that those welds, this one has been welded right there. It sits in the airplane. This is going to be hard to do. I might have to abort this and have to get somebody. Anyway, it sits in the airplane in the fuselage like this, and it pivots up and down. That's why it's important. Remember I showed you yesterday the brake hoses come through here and then they come over to this arm right here and hook to this arm right here on each side. These have extra holes in them. I don't know why. Disregard those holes for those purists out there going, that doesn't have those holes. You're right. I don't know why those are in that one. This is my spare. Okay, so the brake, I'm sorry, I keep saying the brake. The steering cables that I showed you yesterday that hook to the springs, okay? They sit on top of this, and we're going to put it together in a minute. That sits on here as such. You can see where this goes to there, obviously. And those cables that I showed you that went in them fair leads come back over here and hook to your, what steers the wheel. Now, this is a steerable we're talking about. I got this book out to show you. This is a locking tail wheel. Now, I don't know if any of you have this book. Ty's got one, I've got one. It's a great book. It really, I don't even know where I got it, but it's strictly about Navy airplanes, but it really is great pictures and great illustrations. So anyway, there's your lockable tail wheel. And you can see what's going to be different here is these are the same, these are, I believe, bungee cords right here. Whereas on the PT-17s, what we're talking about here, trunnion's the same, only from here, from here to the steering thing, which would sit on top of where this locking device is, okay? That has that smaller cable I was telling you about. But this is your locking tail wheel. It's very simple. This cable right here goes up to the cockpit, and it has just an up, on, off, and it locks the tail wheel down. There it is up close. This bungee cord allows it to turn when it's unlocked. It keeps it going in the straightforward position. And again, this book is very well illustrated. There is the layout for how it locks, and I'll stop there for a second so everybody can kind of look at that or take a snapshot of it. A lot of the Dusters airplanes right here were cut off so that that was not in the front as well, okay? Pretty simple, just locks the tail wheel, okay? Unfortunately, this book does not have a detailed, such as the locking one, illustration of that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through how this works. I think everybody understands that the trunnion sits on the airplane like that. The brake, gosh darn it, the steering cables come through here up to here, okay? That's how that works. When you push the rudder pedals, you're pushing against the springs on and Ty likes to use a tension on the springs so that you can get a business card in between the curls of the spring. That's how I did mine, and mine work well. Mine disconnect at the right times. But what you do have to have enough tension on the cables so that when you go to turn the wheel to steer it, okay, you have enough tension. Okay, this would be right rudder. In other words, this is turning this fork, and we're going to put it together in a minute. You have to have enough tension that you can turn it to get it, your steering arm, to crawl up on this cam. See the cam there? Let's put it about like that, and you can see that that's the lobe, basically, of this steering device. Yes, it's dirty. It'll probably be for sale at Galesburg next year. Okay, so let's look at it from the top, and we'll look at it from the side. Here's the trunnion as it would sit. Now keep in mind that that would be hooked to there, but I'm not going to put it together with nuts and bolts. Okay, so you're going to want this to turn. It has to turn at least that far before it even rides up on the cam. Okay, and then it takes that far. Now it's completely as high as it's going to go. That's as high as it's going to go in either direction. Keep in mind, up until here, you're turning the tail wheel, hence steerable tail wheel. Okay, now when you get into enough of a turn that you want it to disconnect so that you can turn sharply, or you're pushing it in your hanger, you want it to ride up like this. And here it's actually sitting up on the cams. Okay, let's go around here and see if we can get a picture of that. It's a beautiful day here. Elliot and I flew the airplane from Moline to Bossabell, Wisconsin today. It was a great trip. So there you can see how this cam rides. Okay, you let off, you neutralize your rudders, it goes back down, and it rides on this little pad here, okay? That's just so you don't wear the metal out. Now it's down, okay? See how the cam is there? You can see the cam, and you can almost, I don't know if you can see the lips right here. That's what it rides up on. So we'll try to do it in action, okay? So we're turning and turning. We're turning to the right here, okay? And you know what? That's about enough. I'm getting too close to somebody's wingtip. So let's go ahead and turn it a little sharper and see if we can get the tail wheel. So a little extra push on the rudder pedals to move the steering cables, okay? And up it comes on the cam. Okay? Locked to the turning fork. unlocked. Now, a couple of things that I've noticed that come into effect here. If your strut, and this is for the guys that are running the air oil strut, the stock strut like myself, if you have, I pumped the strut up and I believe it says to give basically in the area of 4 inches of chrome play on your air oil strut, okay? I had a heck of a time getting mine to release when it was that low because this thing sits at different angles depending on, this is where your air oil strut hooks on, okay? So the whole trunnion goes up and down as you're bouncing along against the air oil strut, but keep in mind if the air oil strut's not adjusted properly, it might be, for now let's get this out of here. It might be sitting at an angle like this, okay? That would be if the air oil strut's a little too low. Well, okay, I'm gonna level my phone. So the old chair rail on my dining room is about level, and you can see if your air oil strut's a little too low, it sits like this, okay? Your cables don't, your cables know that, I guess they do in the trunnion, but coming from the back, that can create a little bit of a difference between where this will disengage when it's set at its proper height. When mine is down just a hair too low, when I'm pushing it in the hanger with the tug, it will not release. I have to have it so I actually use just a little more than the 4 inches of chrome showing when you're pumping the strut up. And now I'm going to be a teacher and say, remember students when you listened yesterday and I told you how to do that strut and properly bleed it and everything, okay? Make sure that's set right. Okay, so the way this works is, and just because of the lack of a bench and I don't know if I could hold it all up anyway. Oh, remember yesterday when I told you about the casting that can hit the bottom? Well, here's where I'm talking about. Right here. And this one has been ground down. You can't see it, but it has been ground down. And so the rib of the casting right here came up a little higher here. And I've got about 10 of these. And about half of them have that. Again, I do not have the answer for you. Maybe Larry would. I think I've actually talked to Larry and asked him about it. They did not have a grease fitting. They had cork in them. That's a duster mod. But this has been ground, like I was telling you yesterday. Obviously, this is an old piece, but this is the piece that goes on first, and it's just a dust covering, okay? Now, I'm going to have to put my phone down just for a second. Let's see if I can... No, I'm not going to fight that. So I'm going to set my phone down like this just for a second. All right, let's just get it over with. I'm still here. Okay. What can make an airplane shimmy? This is the brass bushing that is going to go into in a minute, okay? There's a tolerance, darn it, I apologize, I didn't look that up. You can find it in your books. There's a tolerance for what that has to be. Personally, I don't think that's what makes them shimmy that much. The big solid tail wheels, if you don't have everything just right, they will shimmy. We fixed George's, my friend George Maddox from Denver, we fixed his last year at the fly-in, and quite by luck, I happened to be taxiing out, and George and I were going to do some formation flying, and I saw his tail wheel just shimmy like crazy, and he had been feeling it. So I came home, we got in my basement, and matter of fact, I believe this whole assembly was all put together, but we just had to fix George's plane, and we got it fixed, and it works great. A difference with his, and I don't know if it's the early one or the late ones, but it's an iteration of one or the other. This brass bushing in there, and we might have put one in Todd Anderson's airplane too, I don't recall, because his would not release, okay? Oh, and that'll lead me to one that we had to fix it. Well, we'll get to that, we'll get to it. Anyway, George's has cone bearings here. And I have heard that that was on the earlier airplanes. Quite frankly, I think the cone bearings would be a better way than this, but I'm not an engineer. So I'm going to put my phone down just for a second, and what we're going to do, I don't have extra hats and springs, so we're going to have to improvise on that, unless somebody wants to fly me some in, okay? So anyway, I'm going to put my phone down just for a second, and I'm going to partially assemble this. Okay, here's how it would look assembled. Now I can't get the cam to go all the way down, so work with me on that. Here's how it would be together. There's where the tail wheel is, obviously. This is tied to the trunnion, and here's your hat. Now the springs in the extra hat that I don't have would go right here. I don't know that I have to explain that much, because I think everybody knows. You open up the back bay, you see that spring. So even with seeing it, that's heavy with a bad shoulder. Even with seeing it, here's where the spring would go, right? It goes over the top of this. Everybody's seen that. And then it has a cap. Now, pay attention to your springs, because they used valve springs, believe it or not, out of the Continental valve springs to put on these springs. They look like there's not much difference, so maybe they work fine. I don't know. I'm a little anal about using the right part for the right thing. So obviously I can't get that to stand up without kind of being on the plane. So I guess I could hold my phone like that, but I'm not going to. Everybody has reference to what level is. Okay, so we just fixed an airplane not too long ago. This is going to be awkward. I wish my help was here. And it's off of it, okay? But here's what, you know what? Everybody knows how the cam works. We're going to forget that. I'll be right back. Okay, so everybody's happy, and you've put this tail wheel arm into your housing. Okay, so you put your arm on, this arm right here, just like that, and it goes over the top. There's the cams. No, Ty is texting me as we talk, Ty Hammerlin. Actually, this turned out pretty good, because you can get a really good idea of where the cam is. Now, this top piece is actually tied via the splines. So right now, picture this sitting down against, the spring is pushing it down against the top of this. And so now when you go to turn, you're going to turn your tail wheel. Right, left, right? Okay, so this piece does not turn. This piece turns. So that piece sits right here. And when you turn to the right, it goes over here and it rides up on this cam, this lobe right here. That's your right lobe and your left lobe. It rides up on that cam. This actually worked out better than if it was together. So when that rides up on the cam, okay, picture it's riding up. See, it's still turning it. And then it rides up and it comes off of the splines, and now you have a free-wheeling tail wheel, okay? So the wheel is turning right now, regardless of where you have your brake cables, your tail wheel is turning. Gosh darn it, I said brake cables again. Steering cables. So here we are, we're turning to the right. The wheel is disconnected now, because we are up off of those little splines right there. And the wheel is disconnected. It does nothing. See here? And no matter what you do with the rudder cables, it will not go back down over them splines until it's up here riding up on here. See? It's riding on the top. And when it goes by here, it pops back down on the splines and you're steering it again. It works both ways. you'd say, okay, I'm pushing it back into the hanger and the tail wheel is backwards. That's right, but it's riding up on the cam, see? The tail wheel is riding on the cam. It's already out, so it's freewheeling. And the tail wheel is riding right here, all the way around, and the splines are not lined up. If you look right here, there's a big gap in the splines. That's so when the tail wheel is turned around and you're pushing it into the hanger, that it won't lock backwards. It has to go all the way back around to mate up with, and it's better to see from the top, to mate up with this. See how there's not splines all the way around? That's why, and it can go either way around. So we had an airplane. This post, which is this piece right here, you can replace. It presses down inside of there. There's one without it in it. See how it would go right there? And it goes right down to there. Now, look. If you look closely, much different height in those splines. See the one on the bottom? The splines are longer. See how the pin lines up here? See how this buries out? That's all fine and dandy. But look, the splines are about a 1/16 of an inch longer. What happens is, this cannot ride up high enough to get above some of these splines. We fixed a tail wheel on an airplane and that's what it was. We tried this and we tried that. We tried putting extra pressure on the spring. We tried taking the pressure off the spring. We finally discovered that this hat, when it's on there, the splines were so high that they were hence higher than if it turned and the splines were higher than the cam, if that makes sense, okay? So when the steering would ride up on the cam and you want it to undo, it'd get up to as high as it could go on the cam, but it was still tied to the tail wheel. So we had to file those splines down. That's like we were talking yesterday. There's certain little tricks in this Stearman world that they're just terribly important to know. This thing about being ground to me is a huge one. Because when I put my tail wheel back together, and trust me, it was all stock, original, new, blah, blah, blah parts, and it wouldn't spin all the way. And I looked at that and looked at that and looked at it and looked at it. At the book 10 times, at the numbers 10 times, probably called half of the people I'm talking to right now. And I finally went down my basement, and at that time, I have about 10 of them now, but I had about 5 at the time of these. And I'm looking and looking and looking and looking. And finally I see, well, I'll be darned, someone has ground that off. Sure enough, out of the 5, I looked and 2 of them were ground. The odds of that happening, in my opinion, are out of 10,000 of these tail wheel trunnions, of me having, in 5 of them, of me having 2 that somebody just happened to grind down. Nah, there's just no way. So that's something you need to check on if you're having trouble with your tail wheel doing a 360-degree turn. So after we discovered this and fixed it, I believe that was Pete, Spear, and Ty and I, we discovered that these splines were a little too high. And this shaft had just been replaced on that airplane with the dusters and sprayers part. Excuse me. So we thought, well, did it not go down far enough? We couldn't see this through that, so we didn't really know. The pin was in it. And by the way, that pin is supposed to be flush, not up like that, okay? It's supposed to be flush. Okay, Stearman folks, I had a little interruption there, but I'm back. The last I was talking about was this pin here. And again, this pin has to, I'm going to go back a little past where I was. This pin has to be flush. I don't know that it matters as far as inside this housing, but it certainly has to be flush in order to take care of this pin. Talking with a couple of the guys about this pin that has the splines on it, they said that dusters and sprayers used to recommend filing it down right here. in order to make the splines lower. As you look at them splines, you say, well, wow, those are really wore out. No, they're really not wore out. They angle up towards the top. You'll see a little bit of an angle there. What that angle is when the hat gets up to the top of this and you want it to undo, when it starts rising up on here and you want it to come undone, you don't want it to bind on there. Well, that's all rusty and nasty looking, but anyway, you don't want it, you want it to come up and go click and come off easy. So a lot of guys say that you should even take a little file, a jeweler's file, and round the tops of those to kind of help that come undone. It does loosen up a little bit, but what on some of the planes you need to check from the top of here to the bottom of here, and what that does is it allows. I would bet that when they set these tail wheels up, there was a guy on the bench, maybe not for every tail wheel, but I'll bet for a lot of them. And what they would do is they would each tail wheel assembly went out probably as a whole trunnion assembly. That hook to that, up through there, the springs on top, the hat, set the tension on the spring, which is quite easy, and then they would test it to make sure that it would undo, because if it doesn't undo and allow the tail wheel to free swivel, it takes about a half a mile to turn the airplane around. It could cause you troubles if, say you were maybe going to make a fast turn on the runway, shall we say, a quick turnaround on the runway. You want that. Matter of fact, I did this because when I first got my plane together and this was all brand new parts and this would not disconnect, I was trying to turn it one day and getting to get the tail wheel to release, and I was kind of popping the brake a little bit and giving it some gas and pushing up on the stick to lift the tail slightly to get it to undo, and I put so much side pressure on the tire, I blew the tire out. When I say I blew it out, what happened was it popped it back and it ripped the tube. So it's important to have this release good. You don't want them too loose because that's when you get the shimmy. When this hat is properly down on here, there it is. When it's properly sitting down on there, there's very little movement to it. I don't know if I can do that. I might actually. When it's sitting down on there, it's tied right to it. But as it comes up, there's a little bit of play there, and it allows the wheel. I think that's probably where you get the shimmy. You want this hat down, okay? So, you know what? I think that's about all I can talk about on tail wheels. I would like to talk some more. I wish we were at Galesburg so we could just stand around our planes and talk, but we will do that in 2021, and I will scratch tail wheel off of my agenda. I don't know that I covered it as well as I could have because I just didn't do it. This thing has kind of taken the wind out of a lot of people's sails, including myself. I'll get it back, trust me. But I actually had envisioned setting up an assembly to where that trunnion, I would mount it on something. And my friend Rick Ropke, I think, has some frames and stuff. I'd even like to get the back end of a frame and mount that on there and go through how this whole thing works, because it sounds pretty simple, but it's all got to work properly for you to have a properly functioning steerable tail wheel. And again, don't use the rayon tires. Keep in mind that using a solid tire, which is a great thing, but the solid tire puts quite a bit more stress on this whole assembly. So that's it about 2020 virtual seminar from Bob Swint as I do a panoramic view. I hope that it helped out. I didn't realize it's a little tougher than standing up because you can't field the questions and walk your way through as easy. But it also keeps our interest and it makes us feel like we accomplished something in the technical part of our world. So everybody have a great virtual Stearman fly-in, and we'll see you in 2021.